Great. Thank you all for coming. We're very excited today to be talking about early optics in photography with process historian Mark Osterman. This is part of our series that is historic process demonstrations that we'll be doing throughout the rest of the year. There are 2 more of these, so we hope that we see you for those also. These demonstrations have been funded by Art Bridges and the National Endowment for the Humanities, NEH CARES. Without these, we wouldn't be able to put on these presentations during this time when so many people can't physically come and visit, and we can't physically host workshops. So we're very grateful for the support that they've provided so that we can provide something for you at home to get a glimpse of what it's like to take one of our workshops and see that side of the museum. This program was also made possible by members and donors. During this challenging time, we really appreciate any support that we can get from our community. And so if you'd like to contribute, we are incredibly grateful. And thank you to all of our members and donors who are attending today. So just a quick overview for this. When we're using Zoom for this demonstration, please use the Q&A function to ask questions. It will be at the bottom of your screen. We will address all of the questions, or not all of them, but as most as we can get to at the end of the talk, and we'll provide a way for any questions that we didn't get to for you to actually continue that conversation, ask those questions. If you're having any technical issues or you just want to say hi, feel free to use the chat function. For layout, we strongly suggest that you view this talk full screen using the speaker view. This will enable you to see the featured perspective instead of seeing multiple screens at the same time. If you're still seeing multiple screens, you can use the pin feature to make one bigger or the other. But we will try as much as possible to make sure that you're seeing the screen that you should be. If you have questions about how to do this, feel free to reach out to us after for future talks. You can also look up using Zoom's FAQ that they have online to figure out how to do it for your specific device. So again, thank you all for coming, and I'm very excited to turn it over to Mark, who's going to tell us a little bit, well, not a little bit, quite a bit about early optics in photography. Mark, take it away.
All right. Well, here I am. I'm sitting in the dark. I know this is supposed to be a talk about lenses, and it will be, but I can't talk about lenses until I talk about light. Lenses are great. They focus light. They do miraculous things, but we can't use them unless we have light. Here's the thing. Light has been around for a really long time. At least on Earth, light has been around, well, as long as there's been a sun, maybe not the sun we have, some sun. There's been a light coming off of the sun or reflecting off planets, but light has been around for a long time. Lenses have been around for a long time too. Lenses are in every animal that has an eye. There's a lens, but how lenses were used for early photography is another story. And so I hope that today I can shed some light on how light is perceived. I can't really describe light easily, but how light is perceived and more of the nature of light, which is really, when you study light, you're studying the nature of light. The thing that's interesting about the study of light is that for centuries, people knew exactly what it was. And then every other century, somebody said, well, it's not like that, it's like this. And so we currently have an idea of what the nature of light could be. But before that, there was a lot more. And so I hate to assign dates for the inventions of things. It's a slippery slope. And like people who are on the side of Edison or Tesla, everybody has their heroes. And so when you study anything that is technical like this, you might say, someone thought about it around this time, or someone else wrote about it at this time, but they were doing it 30 years before. I'll see if I can do my best. I can only skim over the early history of the study of light and vision. And the best I can do is give you an idea of what we think was thought of in the early days. So I think what I'm going to do is turn off this light, because this is man-made light. Ouch. And put that aside. Actually, yeah, and these two. These are the books I read to give you some idea of what I think the nature of light could be. And next. So let me start out with something called the emission theory. Certainly long before this, humans observed light. You can't help but to observe light. You have light from the sun, you have light from lightning, and then eventually man makes his own light. So you have light taken from lightning and allowed to burn with some other kind of combustible material. But my favorite concept of the nature of light is the one by Empedocles. Now, Empedocles in ancient Greece, this is 400 BCE. It's a long time ago. Now, again, certainly people thought about light before him, but Empedocles has this notion that Aphrodite puts fire into your eyes, and this divine fire comes out of your eyes and lights up the object. So what we would have is something like this. You have an eye. And the light coming from the eyes. And once the light comes from the eyes, it bounces off an object. Here's a tree. So the light comes from the eye, bounces off the tree, and then comes back in to the eye. And that's how you have the sensation of vision. So that makes vision possible. It didn't answer why you can't see in the dark. So there's some flaws to this theory. How do you see in the dark? Your eyes don't light up the dark. Although they looked at animals and they could see that the eyes from animals would light up. It kind of helped the theory a little bit. But what do you do when the eye bounces light off the object and it comes back in again in the dark? You can't do it. Well, say another 100 years, and Euclid, he comes along and he says, well, yeah, I kind of like this idea. It's okay. But I want to tell you that light travels in straight lines. Okay, so we have straight lines. Light's traveling in straight lines. And these straight lines are called rays. So we get the concept of a light ray. So single line of light coming from the eye. He also understands, or I should say, he observes the concept of refraction. I have a piece right here. You've all seen refraction before. Here's a container of water, and if I put this rod in the water, you can see that the line of the rod is askew with the rod that you see in the water, and that's due to refraction. You can see it even more when you look down. If I look in one direction here, and you've all seen it when you look at something in a pool or something in a large body of water, it doesn't look right. That all has to do with the fact that light bends. It will bend when you look at light through a clear medium. And that's going to come in a little later when we talk about lenses. But light does travel in straight lines, but it also bends. Actually, I need to give this to you. Stay right there. Take it from there. I just really love the opportunity. So Around 1020, Al-Hazam, and this is the man who really is responsible for a lot of what we know about light cameras, the idea of the precursor to photography. Al-Hazam says that light actually comes from a luminous body and reflects off the object and then goes into the eye. And so, in this case, remove these, and I'll bring in some light. Okay, so there's light, and then light strikes the object, and it actually goes into the eye, which is where we are right now. We still believe that. And it goes further, because he says that it goes through the eye to the back of the eye, where we know where the retina is. And that it's not just in the back of the eye, but it is the brain that establishes the sensation of light and the sensation of vision. And I always hated it when they would say, yes, of course, you see things upside down and backwards. As a dyslexic, it made me nuts. But whenever you work with lenses, you see this. You see that things are upside down. He's also the first person to observe the effect of the camera obscura. And so what he sees is, and again, I should go back. The camera obscura just means dark room. And so what he sees is an aperture in a room, so that light goes through this aperture. Who knows how big it was, but it goes through an aperture into a darkened room, some say a tent, and he sees a visible image on the other side of the wall, so the tent wall or the room wall. And this is because of light bouncing off the subject, not coming from your eyes, bouncing off the subject, coming through that hole, and then inverting right side up, upside down, and you'll see a visible image. He saw this as well when he looked at solar eclipses. And so there was an eclipse not too long ago. Do you remember taking a cardboard box and looking through it? Even better yet was the concept of seeing the apertures between leaves on trees and the projection of the progress of the eclipse that was actually projected in real time. And if you remember, you saw something that looked like this. You saw little tiny eclipses on the ground. He called these moon sickles, another great term. He observed the inversion of images through both the pinhole and the lens. Lenses were pretty hard to come by back then, but I want to wait a little bit. I'm still on the notion of things before lenses. Pinholes are the first way that people could see what would later be a photographic image produced by light. Now, when you're dealing with light, you don't always have to use a lens to make an image. You know, the earliest images that were made with light were simply silhouettes or shadows, to catch a shadow. I have a little demonstration piece here to show you the concept of silhouette making. Now, silhouette making, of course, has been known since ancient times as well. If you had somebody in a cave and you have a fire, a single light source, mind you. You have a single light source and you're standing between the light source and the wall, then you're going to see your shade or your shadow. Well, by the 18th century, they had different ways of capturing shadows. And I just happen to have right over here a physionotrace machine. I'm stepping out of my timeline a little bit, but I just wanted you to see what a physionotrace is. Let me go over here. Nick, can you pivot that around a little bit? So here's a physionotrace. It goes up and down. The subject would sit in the chair. Because I can't have any subjects right now, I have Chantel. This is Chantel. Put Chantel back there. And I'll turn off the overhead light. Well, actually, before I do that, let me just show you what I'm going to do. I'm going to trace Chantel's shadow on this screen. And as I trace it on the screen, it's going to draw it up here in miniature. Let me put the paper up there first. Now, of course, you could do this without this machine. And people did. People do silhouettes still today, and they cut them. They do what they call freehand cutting. But this is an example of taking a silhouette. Like you would take a picture. You're taking a silhouette, you're not just making a silhouette. So let me put this in the right spot. And then turn off the light. Now, when I trace the features, okay, Chantal, hold still. When I trace the features, I must actually follow along with the little cursor on here. There's a little knot. If I don't follow along with my head, I'll get something called parallax error. And so the head will be distorted. So I actually have to follow along with it. So I usually start with the forehead. With a little nose. Tiny chin. And then I go back up to the forehead and I do the hair. Like so. Turn on the light. And there you go, in less than 10 seconds. There is a fair drawing. If I took more time, it'd be better. But what we would do then is actually blacken the paper and cut it out, and you'd have a silhouette. Now that's the 18th century way of making images with light. Now let me step back into the nature of light again. So that is just light. We still haven't really decided what light is. We do know that light comes from a luminous body. It reflects off of objects. It goes into the eye, and it's actually your brain that establishes vision. Well, around 1690s or so, Isaac Newton describes another concept that light is actually formed by elastic particles. He calls these corpuscles. And it's a corpuscular theory of understanding light. And these things are emitted from luminous bodies, of course, the sun in this case, or the candle that I have is a luminous body, reflected off objects and into the retina. It's very similar to Al-Hatham. But he also knows by experiment that light is not just white light. White light is made of all colors. And you can still see this today. If you have a prism and shine light through a prism, you'll get all the colors. And so if I do this, let's see, the prism. Is that a prism on the board? Yep. And I shine some white light on there. The white light will be broken up into different colors. The colors will go in a sequence. It goes something like this. There we go. So we have white light into all the colors that make white light. And in fact, if we were to combine these again, if we used a lens and another prism so that they would converge, they would go back to white light again. It's a great experiment. It's not something I can do live with the room that I'm in, but it's very, very easy to do. So white light made up of different color light. And it's this mixture of colors and the notion of how colors are made that leads Christian Huygens. All these names are very hard to pronounce. If I were Dutch, I could do better with it. Christian Huygens in the 1690s, around the same time as Isaac Newton, he has the notion that light is actually based on very, very invisible particles moving through ether, which is surrounding all of us. Imagine yourself as the fruit in a Jell-O salad, and the Jell-O being the ether. So you're surrounded by this substance, and that light travels through that substance, and it travels in waves. And so different colors have different waves. Actually, I have a slide. Can we look at the spectrum slide number 1? Bring that up. Look at that. When it works great. And so now, if we look at this, and I'm looking at a screen here too. On the far left, you can see that there are gamma rays, then X-rays, and then UV rays. And then there's a sliver, which is then enlarged to show the visible spectrum that we as humans see. And then beyond that, you'll see infrared rays, microwaves, FM and AM radio waves, and long range, all kinds of rays. So, the visible spectrum is part of this series of waves. We don't know what to call them yet, but we know that they move and they undulate. I'll come back to the blackboard again, please. I love blackboards. Anybody that's ever had class with me, they know I love it. And so it turns out that yes, okay, light does travel in straight lines. And actually, if we have a light source, it will travel in lines like this. Right? So it'll be divergent. It'll go away from itself, and it'll shine like this. But light actually moves like this in waves. And if we look at that maybe a little bit more closely, we'd see like this. And generally it's expressed, and actually does kind of look like this. Like so. And so these are the waves. And it gets better. Because remember, white light is made up of all kinds of colors. So if we take the actual spectrum and we look at it as a series of waves, it would look like this. I'll give myself a little guideline here. And I'll start out with blue. We go to violet. And then green. Then to yellow. I run out of chalkboard. And then eventually like that. And so there are our wavelengths. The distance between the peaks, okay, so the rounded part, the distance between two peaks is a wavelength. And that's measurable. So there's a wavelength here, there's one here. Notice how they get wider. When I finally get over to red, the wavelengths are very wide. And so these are wide wavelengths, are always in the warm colors. And as you go this direction, back to the blue. And can you bring up that slide again, please? That one of the spectrum, essentially what I've drawn here. All right, so if we look at that spectrum again, you can see that in the blue, you'll see blue and it says 400. So that's the wavelength number, 400 to 500 to 600 to 700. That's the area that humans can see. But there are many other wavelengths that we can't see. And so you can bring it back to me again. It's James Clerk Maxwell in the 1860s who figures out that there's waves that are made of electromagnetic particles. And so he's the one that establishes a model wavelengths. James Clerk Maxwell is a really interesting guy, particularly in photography, because he's the first person to really make images with color. If you're familiar with the history of photography, he does an experiment where he makes 3 negatives of a ribbon, a tartan ribbon in England, and makes 3 different negatives, and by projecting them through 3 different filters, makes a virtual photograph, a color photograph. So James Clerk Maxwell. Well, so we know that these waves of light are now electromagnetic. It's pretty much what we feel today, that these are electromagnetic pulses that move through the air. And, you know, light is very fast, much faster than waves in a water. If you dropped a stone in water, you would see the rings. It's much faster than that, much faster than sound. Sound is interesting because, you know, sound can't be heard in a vacuum. Not that I've ever been put in a vacuum to hear anything, but in theory, you need to have something for sound to actually make those waves pulsate. Maybe it's ether or corpuscles. But when it comes to light, you don't need that. Light can travel very quickly through a vacuum. It travels slower when you have light going through a translucent. Albert Einstein establishes the notion that these electromagnetic particles are photons. And so now when we think we know about how photography works, and like I say, maybe in another 100 years, we'll have a different concept of how it works. But we basically say that photons strike photographic film or plates or paper, and that tickles the light sensitive media there and makes a change. So when it comes to understanding light, that's about where we are today. There's much more really, but as far as the basic concept, we know that light doesn't come from our eyes, even though I love the concept. I still think we should, that would be a great mask for Halloween. It's something lights coming from the eyes. But I think what we need to do now is talk about the notion of refraction and lenses. All right, so we have a prism. Here is a prism. Is that a prism there? Yeah, that's a prism. There's a prism, and when we have the light going through the prism, I'm going to bring that up again. Watch that it does. Okay, here is the prism. And again, we have white light going through it. And these are chalk for using on the street. They're pretty neat. All right, so we have light going through and breaking up into colors. Well, of course, lenses are really 2 prisms. If I take a prism like this, and I take another prism and go like that, kind of looks like a lens. So let me show you something. Let me get this second camera. Bring that up. All right, do we have the second camera up?
Yeah, it should be there.
Let's see it on the screen. Right, okay, so let's see, where am I? Okay, here are 2 prisms. They're shallow prisms, but they're 2 prisms. If I put them together, I get this. You can see that they look like the side view of a common lens. In fact, here is a common lens, and you can see how it's wide in the center. Let's go back to the blackboard because it might be a little easier to draw than to show in real time. So if I have two skinny prisms like this, well, I could just as easily have something that's circular, looks like this, like so. And right now, what I'd like to do is bring up, actually bring up slide number 2. I didn't talk about that, but I think it's a good time to bring it up. Slide number 2 actually shows the notion of what a lens could be if you didn't know what lens is. What is the word lens? There we go. That is a water droplet. It's a water droplet on my rose bush. And so, you know, in the days before people were grinding lenses, where did you find a lens? Well, that would be the first way that you'd see a lens, would be a water droplet just dangling just before it drops. Or you could put a hole in something and drop some water. In fact, one of the earliest microscopes is made with a lens using a water drop like that. And so that particular kind of lens, you could make a photograph with it. You'd have to let it. It would be a very short focal length. But we'll talk about that. Let me see illustration number 3, please. And this hopefully, oh, okay. That's not what I was thinking, but that is an illustration showing the earliest drawing depicting a camera obscura. Now camera obscura means darkened room, so don't think of it as a box that Vermeer used. This is a room with a hole, and they're seeing the inverted image because of the pinhole. Let's go to the next illustration. It's probably the one I'm looking for. Huh. There must be missing one. There should be an illustration showing lens types, about 5 in a row. Although I love that illustration too. Do you have that one? If not, I can draw it on the board.
I don't have that one. I'm missing that one, Mark.
Okay, no problem. I'll draw it. All right, come back to my board then, and I'll show you the different types of lenses. All right, so I'm not on there yet. So switch me back. Yeah, it's all about me. Right, so here is, I may have to exaggerate these to make them easily understood. This is the most common type of lens. It is a biconvex lens. And actually the word lens, can you give me camera number 2? Let me see if I can show this on camera number 2. The actual word lens comes from this. Let's see, can I show it? Can you see that? Yeah, that is a lentil beam. It's a lentil beam, and if you think of the lentil beam, maybe I put it in my hand here. Yeah, if you think of the lentil beam, they look like little lenses. And in fact, the Latin word lentil or lenti is where we get the name lens. So the first kind of lens is this one, which is a biconvex. The shape is convex. So like this. It can be very skinny. It can be like this. It can be really fat. But if it's the same on both sides, or nearly the same on both sides, then that is a biconvex lens. I'll just leave one on the board here for reference. There's biconvex. The next kind of lens we might have would be a convex, but flat on the other side. So this would be plane or plano-convex. Biconvex, meaning both convex, plano-convex. Here is a concave, and this would be plano-concave. So plane and then concave. When I was a kid, I always thought of this as caving in on itself. So that's how I remembered, concave. So convex, convex, concave. Here's another example. concave on both sides. So, and the last two are a little harder to discern. But if I had something that had a curve like this, let me fix that. I'm seeing these from the side, not from the front. Okay, if I had a curve like this, and I had an inner curve like this, you can imagine that if I follow this curve and I follow this curve, they would never meet. So that is a concavo convex lens. And then finally, there is a meniscus lens. And a meniscus lens is shallow on the back. So this is convex, concave, but it's shallow so that these lines actually intersect. And those are the major lenses. I mean, some people will include a plain sheet of glass and maybe a sphere. And we don't need this. So I'm going to get rid of those. And we're going to concentrate on these. The important part about understanding this type of lens is that this one will make an image. This one will focus an image. This will not. This will not. This will not. And this one will. So the meniscus, the plano-convex, and the biconvex lens are the lenses that were used in the earliest days to make images. And this is before photography. So it could be just for a camera obscura for gazing. We can turn off the lights. I can show them on the. There we go. And would you take all this? All right. So I have another nice little demonstration piece here. Here is. I think we can see that. There we go. This is a light box that has filters to allow me to have 4 lines of light. And so, if I take a convex lens, and this is a demonstrator kit. This is a cutaway of a double concave lens. You can see what it does. It makes the light go apart. It diverges the light. The light is divergent. Whereas if I put a biconvex lens, look at that. It focuses the light. And that's what we need to make a visible image. I just want you to notice that this particular one, I'm not sure if you can, you can see that it's a shallow biconvex lens. Watch this one that I bring in, which is kind of stout. And you see how short the lens will focus. Again, there is a short focus lens. There's a long focus lens. The thing that's interesting about these very, very simple lenses is that when you're out and about and looking for lenses, and you have it easy, let me tell you. Imagine being in the 15th century and looking for a lens, let alone, I mean, even when Niepce, Hercule Florence, William Henry Fox Talbot, when the early inventors of photography made images, they had a hard time finding lenses. You know, you had to go to an optician. Not everybody had a lens. Heck, I get most of my lenses from the flea market for $1. Okay, you can turn the lens back on again. Just remove this. Stage 3. And so, when we're talking about focusing in lenses and just finding a lens, the most common lens you could find was biconvex. Even today, if you have a magnifying glass, the kind with a handle, it's biconvex. If you go to Michael's Arts and Crafts or any other store that sells horrible plastic lenses, it's going to be a biconvex lens because that's something you can focus with. Mind you, you can use the other lenses as well. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you how to find the focal length of a simple lens. And I'm going to do that by going outside. The only place we could use to show this was actually using the skylight because here at the George Eastman Museum, I work in a basement. So I'll be with you in a second. And so now you can see that I have a focused image with this lens, which is very wide and very fat. If I bring in the next lens and put that on the same stand, notice how the image is not as bright, but it's bigger. And so now the difference between these two lenses, this lens is a thick lens in the center and it focuses closer and it makes a brighter image. This lens is a thinner lens and it focuses farther apart. So, understanding the focal length of lenses, all you have to do is look and see how thick they are in the center. Now, to really have the true focal length, I'd rather focus the sun on this piece of paper. But of course, if I do that, I'll catch the piece of paper on fire. And you know how the museum hates that, right? Yeah. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to assume that the clouds are pretty much at infinity. And now if I bring my ruler up to that lens, can they see the ruler? Right, it is an 8-inch lens. That means it is an 8-inch focal length to focus on infinity. And this lens is, what does that say? This is a 12-inch lens to focus on infinity. Now you can see that if I have a choice, if I want a big camera, I choose this lens to make a big picture. But if I want to make pictures faster, I need this lens. There are always trade-offs. When you build a camera, you start with the lens. Now, let me take this off and I'll show you another good example. Here are two magnifying lenses. This one's still in the handle. This is the kind that we find for $1 at the public market in Rochester. So now if I take this and get rid of the handle, if you look at these two lenses, they're about the same diameter. And in fact, if you bought them at the same place, you'd assume that they were the same lens. But look at the difference. I'm going to focus this one, and I'm going to focus that one. Right? This one on my right hand, your left side of the screen, is double the focal length, and look how dim it is. This one in my left hand, your right side of the screen, is a much shorter focal length, and look how bright that is. And yet, they look like the same lens, but not when I hold them this way. Can they see that thickness?
A little closer.
A little closer. Thank you. Well, I love when those blue hands come in. And there are other kinds of lenses as well. Like, here's a lens made from a flask with water. Watch. Now, if I can hold still, I can make an image with that. And that's because, just like glass, water has a refractive index. It will bend light. It will bend light the same way glass will bend. So now, if we were to make a camera obscura, we need something to focus the image on that we can see. So I'm going to take this piece of glass. This is a normal piece of glass. And if I put my lens on there, you don't see an image. Give that to you. Here is a piece of glass that has been frosted on the surface. And now, at least I can see an image. There we go. So you can see an image on that glass. You need a frosted glass in order to bring out an image in a camera. Do these things. Good luck. I'll put this in my pocket. Now, if you are going to make a camera, again, the first thing you need is a lens. This is a Camera Obscura. It's a camera for gazing. It's not for drawing, and it's not for making photographs. It's just for gazing. The way it's built is that there is a lens on the inside. There is a box. There's a second box, and on the inside of that box is a mirror at a 45-degree angle. I can lift up the back, and you can see that there is a piece of ground glass, again, so that you can see the image. I'm going to put the lens back in. And we're going to try to show you the skylight. Let's take some fudging. All right, can they see an image there, Nick? Or? Your way. Good. All right, so now you can see that the image is out of focus, I'm assuming. I can't see it. And as I push that inner box toward the back of the camera, I can now focus the image. So you have a camera that focuses. So much more fun than a pinhole camera because you can actually see an image there. When people make these cameras in our workshops, they just walk around the grounds looking through them. I'll go a little deeper back in the lab. Let me go back in the lab. All right. And we will need the camera 2. I tell you, there's a lot of hopping around in this one. And there's one. I think I want to turn this. There we go. See there? Yeah. Here is a camera typical of the kind that we make in one of our beginning workshops. And all it is a box. It's made of bookboard, a very dense board used for bookbinding, and 2 parts. On the back, we have a little bit of ground glass, which you can make by grinding glass with some valve grinding compound, or you can use wax paper for that matter. But it's very simple. There's the inside of the box. This is the inside box that slides within. I kind of like it because it's fancy on the inside, but not on the outside. It's like it has fancy underwear. And then on the inside of this box is a very, very simple lens. And so with this setup, you can have a camera that's just for gazing. You can look at the back. I can't show you anything here because there's nothing lit behind me, but there is a simple camera. You don't need plans to make a camera. You just need to know the focal length. And so I'll show you some others. In particular, this camera. This was one of the first ones I made in response to the work of William Henry Fox Talbot. His wife called these Mousetrap Cameras. It's very, very tiny. There's no fancy workmanship involved at all. And even the lens surround is just a piece of copper plumbing tubing. And on the back, a ground glass for focusing. And this camera was made with a very simple lens. Let me push it out. And there it is. This is the lid from something called a bug box. If you go to a toy store, they sell a bug in here, and children can view the bug with a magnifying glass. It's a plastic lens, and actually it makes very good pictures. And actually, I'd like to end with this type of a camera. I'm only talking about the very beginnings of photography. One of the things that you find with early lenses is that they kind of focus, but they don't focus fully. Can we have the long camera?
You get both of them.
I do?
Yeah. There you go.
Remember that white light is made up of all colors. So if I have a lens and I focus light, it turns out that the blue light will focus closer than the red light, like so. This is a real problem in the sense that because white light is made up of all these colors and they don't end up in the same spot when you focus, what we find is that the images made with these simple lenses are slightly out of focus. It's something called chromatic aberration, right? Chromos meaning color, chromatic aberration. And so to try to get them to focus both in the same place, they had to overcome that to make really good photography. But in the early days of photography, they didn't have it. Another thing that's interesting, as humans, we see the red more easily than we see the blue. And so even when you do focus the image, you could focus it here, and it's good enough for just seeing an image. But if you put something photographic on the inside, you'll discover that the early photography only sees blue. And so you're focused on this, and the image is even more out of focus because it focuses on blue. So what to do? I'm not going to go into the next incarnation, because actually I'm going to be talking about Talbot processes in my next lecture. But I am going to show you about the Talbot camera. So here is Talbot's type of camera. We'll keep it on this screen. This is a very, very unusual camera. Notice that it has a cork on the front. Now, I made this camera as a prototype for workshops my wife and I were doing at Laycock Abbey. Everybody in the workshop got one of these cameras, but this is the prototype. Let me show you how it's made. The back has a little door, like so. An image by Talbot. Fan mail from some flounder. There's the back of the camera. It's just a box. You can see the lens in there. It's shining. And the lens is just this piece of brass. This is part of a handrail. I bought handrail material. It came in 6-foot lengths. I cut the tubing with a pipe cover, and this is how it goes together. For those of you who want to make one of these. Now we can go to the second camera now. So again, here is the lens. Here is a little ring. Here's another ring. And there is the tube. And so once I cut the tube, I use the same cutters to cut a piece out of that tube to make the ring. The ring was then cut with a little slot. The slot allows me to squeeze that ring to put inside of the tube, like so. And now we can take the lens. In this case, this lens is a plano convex lens. Just drop it right in there. And then we take the second ring, which also has a slot, squeeze it together, and then push it down in until it makes contact with the lens and keeps it in place. And there you go. It's a brass barreled, simple lens. I could have used the meniscus. I could have used the biconvex. I chose the plano convex because that's the type of lens that Talbot liked. Now, when I go to put it into the camera, I put a little bit of paper tape to create some friction. And so put it in like this, and there you go. And you can focus it by moving it in and out, like so. There are at least 24 people out there in the world that have a camera just like that. Now, the question is, what's that? Why does this camera have a cork? Well, because of the way the camera works, you would load the camera by putting your sensitive paper in the back of the camera. You then put in the backing door, like so. And now, when you go to take the picture, either vertical or horizontal, you take the cork out, and you can look inside the camera to focus the image that's being made with that lens. You focus the image on the photographic paper. The paper was that slow that you could take the time to focus it, you could compose, and then put the cork back on. And the longest exposures we made at Lake Abbey, well, it was raining that day. We did a 5-hour exposure. But 2 hours with full sun was about right for this type of camera. And it was used for a process called photogenic drawing. I'm going to end with that and tell you that next time I'm going to be talking about the earliest silver-based processes that include the work of Talbot and Nicéphore Niepce, and again, the pioneers of early photography with cameras not unlike this. Thank you. Yeah, and if we have any questions, there's nobody here.
We do have lots of questions.
Where are they?
And we won't be able to answer all of these, so if you have more, we're going to be showing a link at the end where you can email questions that we didn't get to.
I may not be able to answer any of them. Go ahead.
So, what would a camera obscura be used for other than just gazing?
Isn't that enough? Let me tell you something. When you have a camera obscura that's set up for gazing, it is a wonderful thing. It keeps modern people occupied because it's so fantastic. But if you don't put the ground glass in a camera obscura, if you just put a sheet of clear glass, you can then put tracing paper and then you can draw what you see. And I didn't get into the tent camera obscura, which is another direction I could have gotten. But if you put a lens, if you put a lens in the bottom of a box like this with a mirror, this can be mounted on a tent or anything else for that matter, and it will project an image down onto paper, which you can then trace. That's a good question.
So one person is asking, is there a crossover between other scientific optical applications such as astronomy, telescopes, microscopes, and photography?
Of course. The very first notion of thinking about why you would correct a lens because of the colors not falling in the right place is actually for astronomy. It was also for microscopes as well. But the notion of making something where all the colors focus on the same plane started with astronomy, because when you're looking at stars, you want to be able to see things in focus. So yeah, that's true.
Could you please explain the difference between north light and light from other directions? Why is north light favored?
Okay, I think you're thinking about photography, the actual act of making photographic images. And the north light is in response to people above the equator who have studios. And it's not just for photographers, it's for painters too. It's much nicer in a skylight studio. Okay, so a studio that has big windows. It's much nicer to have your windows facing north so that you don't have direct sun casting shadows in your studio all day long. You have a nice even light, and it's actually reflected off of the landscape into your room. It stays it stays more constant. It will lose light after a fashion, because remember that as light gets later in the day, it becomes actually more yellow, and the early photographic processes were blue sensitive.
So somebody says that they read that early short focus lenses in the 19th century were bad and gave very distorted images. Is that true?
That is a relative term. I think what you're thinking of is, again, after what this discussion has been, you're thinking of the Petzval portrait lenses. They're bad by today's standards because they distort. Just like every iPhone, if you take a picture with your iPhone, the way the lens is set up, and you go up close to somebody, they're distorted. Remember when I showed how a wide lens and a fat lens collected light better than a shallow lens? When you're taking a picture of a living human being, you don't want them to move during the exposure. And so the early photographic lenses used for portraiture tended to be the short lenses because they didn't want the people to move. But then you had the trade-off of having a little bit of distortion. As photography became more sophisticated and the plates were more sensitive that you could put into the camera, they didn't need the short focal length lenses anymore. They could go to a longer lens, which is more flattering when you're doing portraits.
Have camera obscuras with short focal length lenses ever caught fire?
I don't have a good answer for that, although I have a good experience for that. My wife and I once had what I think was the only working solar enlarger in the world. It was given to us on loan. We had it for about 8 years. And the way that particular projector worked was that it had a huge mirror that would hang outside the house. And through a series of levers and wheels, the mirror would pivot and tilt. And so your negative would be in there. The light would shine off the sun, or shine from the sun onto the mirror, through the negatives, through a condenser, and onto the photographic paper. We had to catch fire twice. And the main reason for that was our house was the camera, and the mirror focused on the sun. And because of the rotation of the earth, the light would be no longer square onto the plate. It would actually go askew, and it would focus on the inside of the camera, which was made of wood. And yeah, we saw smoke coming out. Pretty scary stuff.
So I have two similar questions. If somebody wanted to learn how to make a camera obscura on their own, where could they learn that?
You just did. All you need is that once you have a lens, if you have a lens that is 8-inch focal length, you need a box that's 8 inches long. And that will focus on infinity. If you want to focus on nearer things, you need to be able to make the box expand. And where's that other cardboard? Nick's going to bring in that cardboard one. Yeah, it's very, very easy. Again, you start out with a lens. You put that right there. You start out with a lens. There's your lens. You put the lens in something. You put that in a box. If this lens focuses on 10 inches, then your box has to be 10 inches in order for you to get a focused image on the back of the box. Now, if you want to focus on something near, you either have to take the lens and move it forward, which we can do by just taking the lens and moving it like this. You can move it forward, or you can be fancy and make a second box and move it like so. But it all starts with understanding the focal length of your lens. And again, you take your lens outside, focus the sun on the sidewalk, take a ruler and measure the distance from your lens to where the poor ant is dying on your sidewalk.
We can teach you online.
Yeah, we could do a workshop just on that online.
I was going to say that was the softball for bringing up private tutorials and online workshops.
Yeah, we do private workshops in everything we've ever taught here at the museum. And that takes us to pre-photography, light-based drawing, all the way up to making 35 millimeter film from scratch and everything in between. Keep us going.
Great. So we have lots more questions. And I would invite anybody who has more questions and wants to follow up with those, please email workshops@eastman.org. Our team is happy to answer any of your questions and talk to you more. If you're interested in diving deeper into this topic or a related topic, or as Mark said, basically anything in historic process, they are currently teaching online private tutorials, and we're also always looking for ways to engage more with our online audience. So feel free to check out everything that we have online. Email us with any questions or comments. And I just want to say a big thank you for joining us today on this Tuesday. I hope you all enjoyed the talk, and thank you for bearing with us through some technical issues that we had. We hope to see you for the next one. That will be on Tuesday, November 3rd. So register now, and a huge thank you to Mark for today's demonstration. I'm sure we'd see a standing ovation if we could see people. And thank you to Nick as well, who's coming to us from Camera 3, for helping. And we'll see you all next month for our next demonstration.
Bye-bye.